This was going to be a YouTube short. I'm sure you can tell by the horizontal aspect ratio of this video and the very need for this intro that this is no longer the case. I was originally going to explain everything about Hypnotorious' scoring system in under 60 seconds, but due to the complexity of the system and just how many words are required to accurately explain it, this task would be close to impossible without glossing over parts that would need to be emphasized. However, there's another reason I wanted to leave this to a video. After decompiling the game and researching how the scoring system works, my eyes have been opened to just how poorly balanced Hypnotorious really is, and how in most cases it fails as a social deduction game that adequately rewards the majority of players for finding the odd one out. I've ruined this game for myself, and I'm taking you all down with me. So to accurately explain my complicated feelings about this game, let me first explain everything about the scoring system behind Hypnotorious. Okay, not like that. Let's just forget this was going to be a YouTube short, okay? Cool. Starting with the least important things, and coincidentally all the things that involve every player. There's a hidden action referenced in the accusation segment of the game files titled Penalize Accusing Player for Not Picking. When this triggers, it'll penalize a player, revoking 100 points from their total. Unfortunately, I've never been able to trigger this mechanic in any of my testing, so take this mechanic with a huge grain of salt, or disregard it entirely. Now let's talk about the audience. If there are any audience members in your game, they get to vote on answers that they like in every grouping opportunity. The number of audience votes on your answer is then divided by the total number of audience votes distributed during that grouping phase to define a ratio, and you are then awarded 1000 points multiplied by said ratio. It sounds complicated, but this is a simple audience implementation that you see in many of Jackbox's entries. And to finish off this category, the targeted player will receive 5 points every time someone else presses the applause button during their role reveal. At least that's the intent. After scrubbing through the gameplay footage you're watching right now and counting all the applause votes on a few instances, the final tally on the scoreboard is far short of what I counted each time. I would assume there's either a related bug in the code, or the game's engine simply can't handle counting mass amounts of inputs from time to time. Either theory is plausible, to be honest. Oh well, super simple, nothing harmful. Yet. Next, we'll talk about the regular players, which make up the vast majority of a round. Firstly, in each grouping phase, a regular player can earn 1000 points for every player that they get in a jar together with that also shares their category. This point bonus can stack for every other similar player in a jar, even though the final category reveal segment would suggest otherwise. Now, in the accusation phase, regular players can earn 3000 points if the majority catches the outlier. If the outlier gets away, however, the regular players instead get nothing. Now, here's where things get particularly bad. Let's talk about the outlier. In each grouping opportunity, the outlier gets 2000 points for simply being the outlier, no skill required. That's a guaranteed 6000 points a round for doing absolutely nothing. But that's far from the only thing. During the accusation phase, if the outlier gets caught without voting for themselves, they get nothing. But if the outlier gets away without voting for themselves, they actually get 3000 points despite the game literally telling you they earned 5000 points instead. And the worst thing of all, if the outlier votes for themselves, they earn 5000 points regardless of whether they were caught or not. Now that is disgusting. So, now that you're all caught up with the scoring system, let's walk through all the implications this point system creates, and why the outlier is so heavily favored in this game. Now, for the sake of simplicity, audience bonuses and applause bonuses will be ignored during this segment due to audience bonuses not applying to casual players and applause bonuses never usually making a substantial enough difference to drastically change the outcome of the scoring. Firstly, let's calculate the maximum amount of points a regular player can earn during a round, ignoring audience and applause bonuses. We'll separate each scenario into 3 groups. One group will have a maximum of 2 players in a group, another with a maximum of 3 players, and finally one with a maximum of 4 players in a group. Since a regular player earns points for every other player that they group with, we'll use the following formula to calculate a maximum amount of grouping related points. Now we add the 3000 points regular players can earn from catching the outlier, and boom, that's our total maximum points a regular player can earn in a round, depending on their grouping situation. Now let's compare these numbers to the default minimum points the outlier can earn in a round. Since the outlier gets a guaranteed 6000 points per round for doing absolutely nothing, a 2-player group is at a huge disadvantage, because these players need to play absolutely perfectly to achieve the same score as an outlier that can earn the same amount for simply being AFK. If you make even one mistake as a regular player in a 2-player group, you will always be surpassed by an outlier that has no obligation to do anything. Again, 6,000 points is the minimum an outlier can earn. And what's the chance of getting your groups 100% perfect in a round anyways? This incredible handicap makes it so that anyone in a 2-player group has virtually no chance of getting ahead. The only chance a 2-player group member has of getting ahead is if there are audience members and you're like the only funny one on the field, and all the other players collectively agree not to applaud for the outlier. And even then, that's a big ask and an incredibly slim chance. In summary, if you're playing a 5 or 6 player game and you're not either the outlier or in a 3-player group in at least one round, you have almost zero chance of being in the top half of the scoreboard. But it doesn't end there. We'll look at some of the more devastating stuff in a bit, but next let's compare the maximum scores a regular player can earn without catching the outlier, and the total score of an outlier that gets away without voting for themselves. Unsurprisingly, the regular players never beat out the outlier in this scenario. And why should they? The outlier got away fair and square. The only real note here in this comparison is the tie-in scores for a perfectly grouped 4-player group that let the outlier get away, and an outlier that didn't vote for themselves when getting away. Now, you may be thinking, oh, maybe there's a shot for 4-player groups, even if the outlier does get away. But riddle me this, if these regular players are smart enough to perfect their group 3 times in a row, then how likely is it that these same intellects would indeliberately mess up the accusation? Yeah, that's what I thought. But we're not done with the statistics yet. We haven't even compared these maximum regular player scores to the maximum outlier scores. An outlier maximum that is highly likely to be achieved and only requires the outlier to identify themselves and accuse themselves. 11,000 points across all total player counts, of which can be triggered by a single action. I wish I was joking. Now the 3-player groups have virtually no ability to catch up, and the 4-player group is only allowed one mistake if they don't want to have less points than an outlier that votes for themselves. One mistake of leeway. That's all the mistakes a 4-player group is allowed to have if you want to compete with an outlier that identifies themselves. Which is very common, by the way, at least in my experience. And that luxury is only going to 4 out of 7 regular players in a full 8-player game of Hypnotorious. In an 8-player game, you have a 37.5% chance of being in this smaller group of a round, and have almost no chance to make it to the top half of the leaderboard. Hit the 18.75% chance that this happens twice, and you may as well give up then and there. You'll have almost no chance. This same logic applies to 6-player games, but the odds are slightly lower. A 33% chance of being in the smaller group of a 6-player game, and a 16.7% chance of being unfortunate enough to be handed that same disadvantage twice. Now, if you're still thinking all these statistics and handicaps are a little too much to be true, well, you're in for quite a ride, because I have some of the most outrageous 6-player footage that reinforces everything I've covered to an alarming degree. Footage where I so happened to be the outlier twice.
Take me back to launch when I enjoyed this game blindly.
This very footage captures quite possibly the most perfect game I could record to illustrate my points. Whether this was the work of RN Jesus or the divine intervention of actual Jesus, I could not have shown you a more topically relevant recording of this game. I promise you, this game will help you visualize just how busted this game's balancing really is. For context, I was playing a 6-player game, featuring my friends Origaming, JustAnEeveeDog, Lexi, MK Triclops, Capsid, and of course myself. They all knew I was recording this footage and knew that some of their views of this game would be shattered, but without further ado, let's analyze round 1 of this game. Our 3 categories this round look something like this. Trash, with players Capsid, JustAnEeveeDog and MK Triclops, Recycling, with players Lexi and Origaming, and finally Compost, with me, myself and I. In the first grouping phase, Capsid and JustAnEeveeDog successfully grouped together for 1,000 points each. I get 2,000 points each for doing absolutely nothing, and everyone else gets absolutely nothing for grouping incorrectly. I'm in the lead so far. The next grouping phase, JustAnEeveeDog and MK Triclops grouped together successfully, earning 1,000 points each. I get 2,000 more points with the same amount of relative effort it takes to blink, and no one else receives any points. I'm still in the lead with double the points of second place. And finally, in grouping phase number 3, everyone aces their grouping, earning Capsid, JustAnEeveeDog and MK Triclops 2,000 points each, Lexi and Origaming 1,000 points each, and myself another 2,000 points as a participation award. And finally, how does the accusation go?
I'm feeling me, because we have glass. Yeah.
You outlier.
Good thing this game is so badly balanced and it favors the outlier so much.
Categories.
Congratulations! The majority caught the outlier. That means all the regular players earn 3,000 points in victory. Unfortunately, I voted for myself, which means I earned 5,000 points instead, giving me even more of a lead than I previously had. Now the categories get revealed, the big group gets lied to about how many points their perfect grouping was worth, and everyone distributes applause points during the role reveals. An amount of applause which the scoreboard only reflects a fraction of, for some reason. Speaking of the scoreboard, let's look at it right now. Here it is, the scoreboard. Notice anything peculiar about it? Or particularly unfair? Well, first off, the obvious, nothing's more unfair than a 3,805 point lead for clicking one button as an outlier. Don't worry, it gets worse. Apart from my undeserved lead, I'd like you to take note of the complete order of the scoreboard. Quite literally, everyone here is ranked by the strength of their advantages. I'm in first for obvious reasons, places 2 through 4 are all occupied by members of the larger group, and 5th and 6th place are awarded to the members of the 2-player group, the group with the least opportunity for points. This remains true even when ignoring applause points, which is great because I won't be counting applause points at all for the final score tally. Now, obviously this is bad, but surely this observation can't get any worse, right? Right. On to round 2. Our new categories are spins, with Capsid, Justaneevee and Lexi, bounces, with MK Triclops and Origaming, and finally floats, in which I am the outlier yet again. Yet I remind you that with this luck of the draw, I've pretty much already won. Even if everyone else played perfectly and I was AFK for the entire second round, I would still win unless Justaneevee received at least 810 more applause points than me, which I highly doubt is even possible. Unfortunately, my lead only grows stronger. By a significant amount, might I add. Grouping phase number 4 comes along and Justaneevee successfully groups with Lexi, earning them both 1,000 points. I of course get my fix of 2,000 points, and I'm sure you know by now what I get it for. In grouping phase number 5, Capsid and Lexi each get 1,000 points for grouping together, and I'm also here, casually getting 2,000 points for nothing. And now, in the final grouping phase of the game, everyone fumbles the grouping so badly that I'm the only one getting points and there's no clear consensus on who everyone thinks the outlier is. And with this incredible fumbling, I'm sure you have some sort of idea of what happened next.
Oh, just don't worry.
Why me?
I don't know.
Triclops. They've been like weird the whole time.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, sure they are.
Yeah, I don't even feel like I belong.
And were you correct?
Well, let's see what it is.
Lexi.
Yay!
Why did Lexi
Getting
win?
away footage.
End the show.
I didn't vote
the
Lexi.
show, Bozo.
Either.
Wait, it was
It was
me?
me.
Me!
He's the outlier.
Is it?
And now
I voted
the
for myself
Well,
to waste a vote, and I'm just gonna win.
Bounces was one of the categories.
Bounces.
It was spins.
After a very emotional reveal and a laughably pathetic grouping summary, we move on to our final applause segment of the game, and then a final winner was revealed. Place your bets on who you think is going to win the game. You've had a lot of education today, so I'm hoping your bets are all the same. You ready? Too bad, here it is.
Alright, how much do I win by?
Who won?
Me was outlier twice.
That's
Wait.
disgusting. Oh my goodness.
That is not arrow. That's disgusting.
That
I can't believe you're the
is
outlier
a
twice.
Formidable mind.
Formidable mind.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. This is not the first time I've seen that happen.
twice because it's so
Oh my gosh, though, what the heck?
Honestly, that footage reinforces my point even more. Like, this game needs a rewatch.
Yeah, you ended with 22,000.
Guys,
That's right, I entered the game with 22,470 points in hand, 12,000 of which was given to me for free, 10,000 of which was gained for pressing 2 buttons, and 470 of which was given to me by my peers. But enough about me. Let's use some basic mathematics to calculate the final scores of everyone in the game. But I will be ignoring applause points here because they don't count as much as the visuals would suggest, and consequently they don't have enough of an impact to do anything more than just break ties. With that said, let's see the final standings. In 6th place we have Origaming with 4,000 points, who grouped with a similar player once in the entire game, successfully caught the outlier once, and had the incredible disadvantage of being in the small group twice. In 4th equal, ignoring applause points, we have Lexi and MK Triclops with 6,000 points each, both of which grouped with the equivalent of 3 similar players, caught the outlier once, and were both in the small group once. In 3rd place we have Capsid with 7,000 points, who correctly grouped with the equivalent of 4 similar players, caught the outlier once, and had the advantage of being in the large group twice. In 2nd place, the closest thing we have to a legitimate winner, we have the skilled Justaneevee with 8,000 points, who grouped with the equivalent of 5 similar players, caught the outlier once, and also had the advantage of being in the large group twice. And finally, the big one. In 1st place, undeservedly, is myself, Nye, with 22,470 points in total, who had the incredibly unfair advantage of being the outlier twice, voted for themselves twice as the outlier, earned a known 470 applause points, and was given a guaranteed handicap of a preposterous 12,000 points. There are a lot of things to point out about this final ranking. Firstly, despite the questionable performance of all of us in that game, I think it's important to note that in both round 1 and 2, the entire scoreboard was ranked based on the advantage level of each player. Those who were in the small group were consistently at the bottom of the scoreboard, those who were in the larger groups twice were on the higher end of the scoreboard, and myself, who was the outlier twice, wins first place both rounds for obvious reasons. Next, take a look at the difference between second place and first place. Now, even though round 2 was a bit of a fumble for most players, there's over a 14,000 point difference between us. That in itself is unacceptable, but there's more. Remember how I said that I was given a guaranteed handicap of 12,000 points because I was the outlier twice? Do you know what that means? It means the total handicap I was given over the whole course of the game is worth more than the total score of the second place player. I quite literally could have started the game, went AFK for 20 minutes and did literally anything else, and I would come back to me winning? Is that seriously how this game's gonna treat the regular players? Apparently it is. At that point, what's the reason to fight for the win if in 9 scenarios out of 10 you can only get it if you were the outlier in one of the rounds? It's like playing a trivia game against Linky Love. Yeah, the trivia can still be kinda fun, but for the whole game you know for a fact that you're only ever battling for second place. But in a lot of ways, Hypnotorious is actually worse than that because A, you don't learn who has the disgusting advantage until the end of a round, B, said advantage isn't skill based almost at all, and C, you don't even get to see what your final standings were because the game will only ever tell you the winner at the end. Meaning if you really wanted to know everyone's final rankings, you need to screen record your entire game, closely study and analyze the footage just to count a rough estimate at the end. The lack of a round 2 scoreboard especially stings in this case, and it could very well be plausible that this lack was intended to hide these secrets about the game for as long as possible. It's highly unlikely, but that's just a theory. A game theory! So that brings us to the end of this game. After this unholy turnout, and my friends noticing that the balancing was off even before I explained it, I finally decided to tell them everything. I would explain the scoring system behind the game, and I would forever change the perception of Hypnotorious.
For normal players, you get 1,000 points each time you're with someone in the same category as you for each opportunity. For outliers, you get 2,000 for each grouping opportunity just for being the outlier, no skill required.
That's nuts.
I know, it's stupid.
You shouldn't be getting points for that!
Alright, so regular
I'm
players for
disappointed in
accusation, that's 3,000 for getting the outlier, 0 for not. That's all well and simple. For the outlier, if you vote
They
for
get like
yourself
5,000 for
as
being
the
away with
outlier,
it.
you get 5,000 points regardless of whether you're caught or not.
What?
If you yeah, if you're caught,
That's disgusting.
Oh
That is disgusting.
it is. If you get caught and don't vote for yourself as the outlier, you get nothing. If you don't vote for yourself and get away with it, you get 3,000 points despite the game telling you that you got 5,000.
Oh my, that's disgusting.
I know, it's
Making me
awful.
throw up.
It's terrible.
And I thought this
You think that's okay?
game is still good. Even one of my favorite games in the pack is ass.
It could still be a fun game, but oh my gosh.
Yeah.
This is just like, okay, you got the outlier twice. Good job, you just won.
Believe it or not, Hypnotorious used to be my favourite game in the Jackbox Party Pack 10. On the night the game launched, I remember being super fond of the game, calling it the best game in Pack 10, and possibly one of the best social deduction games the company has ever made. And I think that just goes to show how much this game did get right. The presentation of this game is effective and creative, the concept is one of the greatest the company has come up with since ever. Despite the game length, there never seems to be a dull moment. The host, while he doesn't have many lines, has a defined and engaging personality, and most importantly, the gameplay. Figuring out who you belong to, figuring out who the odd one out is, asking yourself if you're the odd one out, all that is genuinely super fun. This is why I praised this game so highly at launch before I knew anything about the scoring system. It had the potential to be one of the greatest games Jackbox has ever made. This is also why I titled this video, "Don't watch this video if you like Hypnotorious." On release at least, because I knew this game had a place in people's hearts and is genuinely enjoyed by so many people that remain oblivious to the flaws of this game's balancing. So if people want to remain innocent and enjoy the game, I don't want to take that from them. But I have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and now that I know the truth, it has forever changed my perception of this game. And now that you've watched through this video so far, I've handed you the same fruit from the same tree as well. So how does it taste? For me, it's bittersweet. Since cursing myself, and consequently all of you with this knowledge, I've no longer been able to take Hypnotorious very seriously as a social deduction game. In 9 cases out of 10, the outlier has such an overpowered advantage that if they figure out who they are, they can get more points than anyone else ever can for catching them. And the fact that there's virtually no strategy to get points as an outlier, being entirely replaced with a 6,000 point handicap, really kills the mood. Both for people that definitely know they're in a group, and for people that believe they're the outlier early on. In almost every scenario, the outlier has a better chance of getting ahead, even when it would make more logical sense to reward the regular players exclusively, especially in the accusation. For example, if the outlier identifies themselves, why is that worth more than the majority catching the outlier? It feels like common sense that literally catching the outlier should be rewarding the majority more than the outlier. The outlier self-identification bonus when being caught should only ever be worth half the majority catching bonus, maybe even nothing, let alone earning almost double. There are just so many advantages that the outlier has where deceiving other players, including themselves, just isn't worth it. In any social deduction game, the odd one out should have a clear incentive to deceive other players so they can get ahead. However, even though the outlier isn't known for certain until the accusation, that's not an excuse to simply give the outlier a 6,000 point handicap just for being the outlier. The outlier should be playing the game with just as much attention and skill required as the regular players. Whether the outlier thinks they're the outlier or not, they should be rewarded for fitting in, not for just simply existing. Currently, the only way they can affect scoring in the grouping phase is to take up space in the jar to prevent other players from joining. But the maximum jar capacity for any amount of players is 4, which means that taking up space is almost never an issue. Hell, in 4-player games, there's quite literally no reason for everyone not to jump in the same jar due to how the scoring works. It really trivializes the outlier experience, especially since it's only really fun and meaningful if you have no idea you're the outlier. If you have no reason to seek out points for yourself, and your handicap is so strong that there's almost no reason to deceive unless the categories are immediately obvious in an 8-player game, then how are you going to spend your time as an outlier if you know for a fact you'll either be first or second place by the end? The only reason that it's not lame for 100% of the time is because the outlier doesn't immediately know who they are. I wholeheartedly think that if the game told the outlier that they were the odd one out at the start of a round, it wouldn't work at all. Another thing that annoys me a fair bit is the score distribution for regular players in 6 and 8 player games. Since these player sizes create regular groups that have different sizes from one another, and because there's nothing in the code to adjust scoring based on the size of your group like in Fixie Text, the smaller group will always be at a disadvantage. There's just simply less points for the smaller groups to get. And it is a disadvantage. It really shows that in my recording, everyone that wasn't me was ranked by how many combined people were in the groups they were a part of. It really does stink. Finally, the lack of attention to detail put on the visual side of the points distribution. There doesn't seem to be very much care put into communicating how many points people get. When catching the outlier, it doesn't communicate how many points the outlier gets if they identify themselves. When the outlier gets away without identifying themselves, the game straight up lies to you about how many points the outlier gets in that situation. The final grouping reveal doesn't accurately portray how many points you get based on the amount of correct players in your group. And finally, the most insulting thing of all, not letting players see the final scoreboard at the end makes it a lot more disheartening at the end of the game. If you're not first place, you'll never know whether you were in second place, last place, or anywhere in between. That is, unless you record the gameplay footage and count a rough estimate of the final tallies manually. All these things are very telling about the management of this game. This had the potential to be the greatest game in Pack 10 and could stand with the greatest Jackbox games of all time. But due to the lack of balancing to make the experience as fair as possible for every player in almost every scenario, and the general lack of polish in the point distribution, both visually and mathematically, it falls short in arguably the most important aspect of the game, and consequently makes the whole experience feel pointless. But pointless isn't necessarily bad. There are a few games in the Jackbox franchise that I would call pointless, but not at all a bad experience. For example, Talking Point's free play mode can be enjoyable sometimes, even though it quite literally does absolutely nothing atmospherically to captivate you, and it is super freeform. With the right group of people, it can be an absolute blast if you all collectively decide to put on specific restrictions and do themed presentations. The Wheel of Enormous Proportions isn't going to be completely fair at all, just by its nature, but the trivia segments are the best Jackbox has ever done, and the wheel segments do an excellent job of giving you the rush of gambling without actually having to swim in real life debt. For that reason anyways. Finally, Fixie Text can be super hilarious, and I think the pure lack of a clear objective allows for a lot of humorous opportunities with a little creativity. I just wish it was way less buggy. But with Hypnotorious, the lack of care in its balancing doesn't inspire new strategies or captivate in alternate ways. The newfound lack of a point in this game only ever really serves as a detriment, and it is super hard to go back with the knowledge I have now. So what next? To make this game worth coming back to, there needs to be a major rework to all of the previously mentioned issues. Giving the outlier a points-based reason to actively fit into a group, restrict the maximum jar capacity based on the number of players, completely rework the scoring in the accusation phase, remove advantages and disadvantages between groups in 6 and 8 player games, make the visuals of player points more accurate to the calculated truth, and finally, let everyone see the complete final scores at the end of the game. But as much as I would like to see this game get another rework, I highly doubt that'll happen. For a couple reasons. Firstly, despite the truckload of negative criticism Party Pack 10 has received, they've already done their fabled major patch, which if they can get away with it will only ever do once per pack. It's such a shame that this company decides to only do major fixes this way. After the fact, they only ever do like 1 or 2 minor patches before they just forget about the game entirely and move on to the next project. Hell, if we're lucky, we'll get a rework in another 7 years like Bomb Corp. And at that point, people have already made up their minds about the game, so what good does it do in the long run to leave it sitting that long? Even though Hypnotorious isn't the only game that still needs fixes in Pack 10, I would doubt that a second major patch would come out anytime soon. But I would love to be proven wrong on this one. Secondly, it seems like they just don't feel like changing the system. As I was writing the script for this video, they released a blog post supposedly explaining the scoring system just as I have, but this blog post has a layer of dishonesty that comes with it. Firstly, the blog post starts off by explaining the scoring system for regular players in the grouping phase, and it's actually spot on. Completely. To be fair, this is the part that the game tells you the least about. While this player-based paragraph is very well explained, there are a few inaccuracies and half-truths in the next paragraph that make my blood boil. For example, the line, "As for that pesky outlier, they can't score points for grouping," fills me with so much rage I can't even describe. Yes, technically they don't earn points for grouping, but they absolutely get points during the phase, which is why they have such a massive advantage. Finally, this blog post explains that the regular players earn 5,000 points each for catching the outlier, which is just a flat out lie. The game literally shows you that they earned 3,000 points for this instead. Hell, that's the only part of the scoring that the game is completely honest about, and this blog post is just trying to gaslight us about the only guaranteed piece of points knowledge that casuals know for certain. Also, this video linked in the blog post has almost nothing to do with scoring. To me, this blog post just shows me that Jackbox has no current intention of rebalancing the game. It tells me that they are a little ashamed of how the outlier works, which is why they refuse to tell the complete truth about it, but they also aren't committed enough to make the changes required to make the game as fair for everyone as possible. So they explain the part that regular players should know about and hide the advantages the outlier has. Most likely they'll just turn their heads to the next big project and work on that instead of fixing bugs in their games. Legend has it that Mac devices still run their games very poorly. And it's such a shame too. So many games could do with a few minor reworks. Civic Doodle still has a final round that breaks on multiple devices. The Devil's in the Details still makes cancelling a selfish task objectively worth more than the selfish task itself, and still allows parents to cancel selfish tasks in like half a second. Nonsensory still has to wait a few seconds after everyone submits just in case people want to add confidence at the last second. But it's pretty clear that, despite our cries, it's very likely that nothing will happen, like always. So if Jackbox isn't going to fix Hypnotorious, then I'll have to do it myself. I've been thinking about it a lot recently, and if enough people want it, I just might make a mod for this game rebalancing and reworking this game's scoring system, with things such as a dynamic maximum jar capacity, adjusted scoring to even out teams in 6 and 8 player games, and of course a complete rework of the outlier. I have a few ideas of my own, but I'd like to hear what ideas you guys have. Let me know in the comments how you would rework the outlier. I'd be curious to hear all your takes on the matter. But with all that said, I hope I've educated you today, and let you all know how, in its current state, Hypnotorious doesn't work well as a social deduction game. But before you go, I want to reiterate one more time that there are still a lot of things I love about this game. The music, the art, the host, the concept. This had the potential to be the greatest social deduction game Jackbox has made. Hell, one of the best Jackbox games ever. But these shortcomings, while simple, harm the enjoyability of this game a lot. But that doesn't mean the potential still isn't there, so if Jackbox isn't going to make Hypnotorious the greatest social deduction game in the franchise, then why don't we? What do you say? Hello, thanks for watching. Before you go, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to my friends Capsid, JustAnEeveeDog, Lexi, MK Triclops, and finally Blue Roomy, all for joining in on the game that you've been watching for the majority of this video's runtime. As well as this, I'd also like to thank TheOrigamingKing for also joining in on this game, as well as helping with the writing and production of this video. I couldn't have done it without you guys. Also, this very game of Hypnotorious that you've been watching was recorded in Jackbox University, the greatest Jackbox Discord server I've ever been a part of. Better than the official one, might I add. I was not paid to say that, but I would gladly appreciate it if I was, wink wink nudge nudge. There's a small chance I put an invite link in the description of this video, so if I did, why don't you come on down and say hi? Tell them that I sent you. It's not important, but I really like feeling good about that sort of thing. Finally, this video was an absolute blast to make, and I was wondering if you guys would like to see any more Jackbox video essays from me in the future. If you do, please smack that like button as the cool kids say, and while you're there, also subscribe if you haven't already. I promise if I do another video essay, it probably won't be as negative as this one. Alright, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching, and see you on the flip side.